I actually had some stuff on my computer, but I decided that since we've got short time, I'm just going to skip over that and, can show it to people later when we have the more individual one-on-one stuff. Um, so I saw a little bit before that some people are intimidated by this, and that's okay. Raise your hand if you're intimidated, because I certainly have been. So, um, it, like a lot of you, I think the reason that Miriam asked me to talk about this is I'm a print journalist. I was a reporter, a newspaper reporter for 12 years. The system then was pretty simple. I interviewed people, I wrote a story, the paper printed it, people read it, I hoped, but that was pretty much where it ended. Occasionally you'd get a letter to the editor, you'd get phone calls, things like that. They started putting our emails on the bottom of stories, and then you had like more interaction and that sort of thing. And then they started putting comments sections on the bottom of your newspaper stories, and that's when it started to get really weird because you're writing something and there's all these people start talking about it, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what I said, and that's not what I meant, and it sort of gets out of control, and you're like, wow, you realize that it really is a whole new world at that point. In 2006, I wrote my first blog. I was working for the Charlotte Observer, and the Carolina Panthers were in the playoffs. 2 years before, they'd gone to the Super Bowl and lost, so there was a lot of enthusiasm. Everybody thought this year they were going to go back and win. And so during the playoffs, I started a blog called Panther Tracks and followed the team for the Observer. It was really sort of my first experience with that type of reporting and interacting with people and things like that. And what I soon found out, like my first posts were basic stuff like, here's how you get tickets, here's when the games are going to be. I would link to other coverage around the web and things like that. And then I found out I was going to get to go on the road to cover the Panthers when they came up here to play the Giants at the Meadowlands. Although the only way I was going to get to do that was if I slept on my brother-in-law's couch, because the paper didn't have the money to put me up in a hotel room. So my brother's a huge Giants fan. So the fact that he was letting me come up there to stay and cover the Panthers, I wrote a little blog post about it, and I put up a photo of my brother-in-law when he was a kid, like all decked out in his Giants stuff. And that's the point when my editor said, we've created a monster. Because what I found very quickly was the more personal you were willing to be, the more you were willing to interact with people, and the more of yourself you were willing to share in these forums, the more response you got, the more readership you got, and the more rewarding it came. It's a completely different type of I don't even know if it is journalism. It's a completely different type of interaction and media than what I had ever experienced before. And yet I found it was really valuable because people started sending me photos, of their kids decked out in like Panthers gear. And it's not the kind of thing you would run in the newspaper, but on the blog, people loved it. And I went to New York, I covered that game, Carolina won, then we went to Chicago, I went and covered that game. And then I went up to Seattle, and I don't know what happened when I went to Seattle, but the blog just exploded, and it was like every day it was the most read thing on our website. People in Seattle were reading it. The newspapers there started calling me up and interviewing me, and then I was on TV, and then I was on ESPN, and it was the weirdest thing. I'm like, I've covered hurricanes, I've gotten guys off death row, I'd gotten shot at before. I had never had this kind of response to anything I had ever done. It was just the craziest thing. So a few months after that, I'd been at the paper for 8 years, and I was ready to move on. My wife and I wanted to move up here to New York, and I was really interested in covering science specifically. So I came to Columbia and went to their program for mid-career journalists, studied science journalism specifically. But I took that opportunity to really soak in all that Columbia had to offer in terms of new media and learning about online journalism and things like that. In some ways, it was an opportune time because the media business was really changing. Almost as soon as I left my paper, the layoffs started. And another way, it was an inopportune thing because once I finished my year at Columbia, there are no journalism jobs anymore, and it's just getting worse and things like that. So, I felt like I had to really reinvent myself in a way. I freelanced. I worked at Liberty Science Center for a while. Some of my colleagues are over there. But I also started blogging on my own. I started sort of exploring some of these other things. I used Facebook and LinkedIn, but I kept them mainly personal, to connect with people, find out about jobs, things like that. And then I started working at the Natural Resources Defense Council last summer. And that's when I really sort of dove into more of the social networking stuff. Because NRDC has a group blog called Switchboard. And there are, I think we currently have about 100 people blogging on it, not regularly. There's about, 15 people who blog often on it. And then there's, a bunch of other people who might do it, every month or so or something like that when they have a really important issue. These are our experts. They're the scientists. They're the, they're the people who are really doing the work in NRDC, and we're letting them communicate directly with the public. No filter, anything like that. And they really do some interesting stuff. But unlike when you work at a newspaper and you print it every day and it gets, it lands on somebody's doorstep and you hope you're reading it, we had to figure out how to communicate this stuff with people. Because just because they wrote a blog about it didn't mean that people knew it was there or they were going to be reading it or anything like that. So that's when I started exploring things like Stumble Upon and Dig and Delicious and Twitter and some of the other things that allow you to really share the content that you're creating. And, since I was doing it for them, I did it some for myself too. It's the kind of thing where you have to be willing to try, basically. And we don't have the time for me to get into sort of the technical details of how everything works here, obviously. But if there are people who want to learn about some of those things afterward, I could sort of walk you through it. But I found that experimenting and just being willing to try some of these things was a really great experience. Twitter, some of us were talking about it earlier. Twitter has really become my news feed, my RSS feed. It's where I get my information from now, because I can choose the people and the things that I want to follow, and I can choose the information that I want to see. And it's really, every news organization now is on Twitter and is feeding information. How much time do I got? Okay, great. But also people are on Twitter. I mean, many of the people here are on Twitter, and they're choosing things to share. So it's really a great way of human interaction. So that's been my experience. If I can do it, I swear you can do it. So good luck.